there are going to be days where you have seen something that you should never ever want to see or should have seen. And it's okay that they, if you can't, if you think that's going to be an issue, then I'd suggest maybe you look at there's different levels around the country. So like a level one CSI up country might just deal with burglaries and might just deal with car crimes. That's brilliant. That could be your role that you want to build your life with knowledge and experience up to then go, actually, do you know what? I think I'm ready for that part now.
My guest this week is Lorna Markillie. Lorna has a Master's in Forensic Science and Criminal Justice from the University of Leicester, and currently she is a crime scene investigator with the Devon and Cornwall Police, as well as an Associate Lecturer for Forensics at Plymouth University, and she's studying for a PhD in Forensic Science from the University of Staffordshire. Lorna, welcome to STEM with Mr. N.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. Can we just start off first with what is forensic science?
That's a really good question. Forensic science is kind of like the broad nature. You got to think of it as like an umbrella. So forensic science, I always suggest when I'm talking to students that there's two routes in forensic science. You've got forensic science, which goes down lab-based areas. So they deal with the fingerprinting and the bloods and the toxicology and all that. And then you've got the practical side of forensic science, which is basically people who are on front line. So whether that's a crime scene investigator or a collision investigator, yeah, so forensic science for me is the overall broader subjects of everything. And then they separate off into lab-based, office-based, or frontline response.
And obviously, I mentioned in the introduction there that you're a crime scene investigator. So from your answer, that suggests that you're obviously on the front line then out of that.
That's
So
yes.
what does the day-to-day of a crime scene investigator actually involve?
That's a really good question. A crime scene investigator is an interesting role. You do literally do different things every day. So it could be something as simple as you go to a burglary, where you could be there all day looking at lots of different evidence types. Or it could be that you are looking at cars, because something's happened or the collision's happened and the collision investigation team might want to look into, looking at a car or someone's stolen a car and they want to there's the airbag gone off and we need to seize an airbag, to the high case profile, really. So, on a day-to-day basis, it really does vary along. Sometimes you will do nothing, though. Sometimes there are days where you're sat in the office and you're doing admin. I'll be completely honest, there is a lot of admin nowadays because of accreditation and ISO 17020 that's trying to come in. That is in. But yeah, there are paperwork, there are statements, unfortunately, we've got to write, for us attending scenes, and we've got just to catch up on administration duties if we've got anything. And sometimes we have things that we do in the office, so we might do mobile phones, we might do downloads and stuff. So yeah, day-to-day job can really vary. It could be full on for a day where you're at one scene, or it could be that you're at a couple of scenes. Um, that you're only there for a couple of hours, so you can do them quite quickly. But yeah, it can vary from anything as low level from burglary all the way up to just going to a sudden death, or it could be a murder or a major crime. So yeah, it really varies.
And you'd said in the very first question that when you're doing forensic science, you tend to branch off into the lab side or the more practical on-site side. So once you've been to a scene of a crime and gathered up the evidence, do you then pass that evidence on to other teams to process, and your part is purely done or mostly done at the scene, save for the paperwork and things?
Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly it. We you got to think of us a bit like policing in the sense of first responders will go and sort out the incident that's there. We get there, we look at the evidence that's in front of us, we seize that evidence in the correct manner to make sure that the continuity is all there. And then, for example, if we've got a blood swab that we need to make sure is the victim's blood or the suspect's blood, it will get sent off to a lab where they do all the work. Just like fingerprints, although the process is changing a little bit, but fingerprints, we take images, but we're not able to say whether that's a fingerprint or not because it goes to a fingerprint expert. So as much as this glamorous CSI Las Vegas, where, when you've got silent witness, where you're sat there and they've got all this fancy kit, and we do have some fancy kit, we never really do the lab-based stuff unless you're lucky enough to be in a couple of forces around outside of the UK who don't have to deal with ISO, who can still do the labs. I think Bermuda and a couple of other forces around the world still do labs as well as CSI, where they do everything. But yeah, we basically gather the evidence. We have to proportionately look at what we're gathering and why we're gathering it and whether it gets sent off or not to help and support the investigation. So yeah, we're basically frontline policing, but from a forensics perspective.
And I've interviewed on the channel before a forensic toxicologist and a forensic anthropologist, and they'd explained that the word forensic means beholden to the court. So the evidence is to go there. So since you're passing off the evidence you've collected to them, does that then mean that only the people in the lab and their work is beholden to the court, or is part of your job also having to go to court and speak about evidence and the process of it being gathered?
So we rarely don't touch wood, I say that. We do get called to court. If we've sent off a blood swab, for example, and we get a hit of a suspect and that ends up going to court, they ask us to do a statement called an SFR, which basically states that I went to the scene, I did this, I located this blood, my rationale was this, I swabbed it, and then that was sent off securely to another a department who then looked at it. And normally, anything that goes to a lab, whether it's a fingerprint or a blood swab or anything like that, they'll have a statement themselves that they'll do it because theirs is all scientifically like babblish. So whereas ours will just be we attend, we do it, we seized, we sent it. So all for continuity, everything for us is always recorded, and that's why our scene notes are really crucial for whether they need to send stuff off or not. Because sometimes we just don't have the capacity to sit and follow a case through all the way, so we have to pass it off to detectives and say, "Look, this is what we've collected. Here's our notes. Just let us know if you need a statement." Um, we rarely get called. That's not to say we don't get called. We certainly do. But we're probably the last ones now that sort of really get called because we turn up, we collect, and as long as we've made it in our notes and we've collected it correctly, then there shouldn't be any reason as for us to go to court, really.
That's very interesting. I'm glad I asked that because that was part of that was for my own curiosity as well. But it's good to know how much it actually does diverge at that point. So
Yeah,
you'd said that sometimes you just get called to low level things like a burglary, but obviously you'll have to deal with some pretty gruesome scenes if you're called to a murder or whatever. So
yeah.
why did you decide to go down that frontline route rather than sticking with the lab work?
I'm more of a practical person. I love the idea, and I think the fingerprint bureaus and stuff. Who, to be a fingerprint expert, you have to do 7 years of fingerprints and looking at it. And I could do that, but I get very bored very quickly. And the front line in for me, I'm more a practical person. And I found that at university and even when I was at school, I couldn't sit with people talking at me all the time. I had to get up and learn and practice and fiddle and do bits and pieces. And for me, the practical work was is more me. You can tell me to go to a burglary and I'll be with that victim and I'll be there all day. And I'm quite happy in my own element of leave me to it. I'll crack on with it and having that, it's a nice balance of practical work and sort of administration. You're not in an office sat doing admin work, you're out doing practical stuff as well, which is what I really enjoy. So yeah.
That's great because I was actually going to ask as well at one point about what sort of person or personality would be good for being that front line. And you'd mentioned there obviously somebody who likes the practical side, but to
Mm,
what extent does having a particular type of mindset? I don't want to put words into your mouth in the question, but obviously you do have to
yeah.
deal with some very uncomfortable things. So what sort
Yeah.
of mindset do you need to be able to go to these things?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. My students, I'm honest with my students when I talk to them because I teach forensics. They're mostly CSI stuff. Um, and you've got the students who will be in a scene suit who will moan because it's too hot and they're in a hot house. And I'm like, but this is real life. This is what it is. You've had it quite easy. You've had it quite nice. Unfortunately, you sweating in a scene suit when you're not allowed to open windows because it is a murder scene. Um, is reality. And a lot of them, I think, have been quite grateful for that because they realize that the ideology of forensic science and CSI and the way the things are on TV and everything have kind of misstruded what actual CSIs do. Um, so yeah, you have to have life lessons as well. And I think that's the other thing that for me, a lot, and I do get a lot of questions from a lot of other people asking, I've just finished my master's, or I've just done an undergraduate, I've come straight from school into university to do that, and I now want to be a CSI. Fabulous, that's great. But what I really suggest is that you actually speak to a CSI to get that information, to really understand that there are going to be days where you have seen something that you should never ever want to see or should have seen, and it's okay that they, if you can't, if you think that's going to be an issue, then I'd suggest maybe you look at there's different levels around the country. So like a level one CSI up country might just deal with burglaries and might just deal with car crimes. That's brilliant. That could be your role that you want to build your life and knowledge and experience up to then go, actually, do you know what? I think I'm ready for that part now. Or it could be that you've dealt with death at a young age. For me, I've dealt with death since I think I've been to more funerals than weddings, and I'm so used to being around deceased people that it never really even entered my mind that, if they've had a gruesome things happen or anything like that at all. Um, so life for me, students need life experience, but they also need to truly understand that this isn't a job that it's not pleasant. There are days where you come out, and I think I've had there was a couple of cases last year. Even my colleagues who have been in for 20 years said that was quite a horrendous one that we've just been to. So, it always evolves. So be prepared. Not to say that police forces don't have what they call TRIM, so traumatic risk management. They'll always talk to you about it, and you've always got support there. But my key thing is you've got to understand it's not a pretty thing all the time. It's not the lovely going to a burger in the summer's day, where you can nip out and have some lunch and then do whatever. And it's not like that. It can be really, really gruesome.
And that's a couple of times so far that you've mentioned about how CSI has been glamorized in shows. And it is something I did want to ask about
Okay.
because the forensic toxicologist I interviewed, it was seeing CSI. She's ages with me, so we were teenagers when it came out. And it was seeing that made her want to go into that line of work. But
Hmm.
what are the sort of biggest myths that you see, or misrepresentations is probably a better phrasing of it, that you see in films and television?
Oh, you've only got a few minutes with me. I can't go on for hours, but it's simple things. So for example, I love Silent Witness, but being a CSI and sitting there and they get to do the whole thing from start to finish, including the investigation, just doesn't happen. Really doesn't happen. You get to go to a scene and you're lucky. Most of the time we're informed. I mean, this is just me down here. There could be, it might not, I think there's other forces that don't do this, and do inform them, but I will find out via the papers what's happened to that court case because once I've done it, I've written my notes, it's gone, it's done, which is one of the really nice things in CSI because you can do those notes, you can do that, and you can walk away from it, whereas policing you can't really walk away from. CSIs you can. But we don't have the lab next to us where we can just pop in and do some bits. We don't have, I think, the fancy gadgets at the moment, like the US, say that they've got the phones that can do this and do all that. We don't have any of that technology. We are utilising certain things over here in the UK, like crime lights from Foster and Freeman and from Coppertree, UV, blue lights, and we do utilise those, especially for sexual offence cases and stuff. But because we're going down the ISO route, it's another bugbear that we have so many restrictions on stuff, so we can't have the nice technology. My biggest bugbear, I think, is just the fact that just like NCIS and Las Vegas, they do everything from start to finish, and the police aren't involved, but they work really closely. Unfortunately, the people who work really closely with CID or the officers or the detectives are more than likely crime scene managers or higher up because they're dealing with a big case, whereas we are just CSIs. We go in, we clean up, and we leave. But yeah, my biggest bugbear is that we do everything from start to finish. I really wish we did, but we don't.
And it's funny because I'm not in that world, but sometimes when you watch things, there was a show I was watching recently called The Devil's Hour, and the detective walks into the scene, and he's got all his obviously crime scene suit on, and
Yeah.
while he's standing in the room of the murder, takes the hood off and the mask off, and I'm like, no, no, because now your hair and skin cells are in that room, and
Yeah,
um,
it's absolutely. Or they walk in with no gloves and they walk in with no scene suit and they're like, oh, this. And you're like, that wouldn't happen in real life. My partner gets so annoyed. I'm like, that wouldn't happen. That doesn't happen in real life. And if they were stabbed, that doesn't happen. But you've got to glamorize it somewhere, haven't they, for movies and stuff like that. But yeah, it's what you see on the TV isn't always the truth.
And I'm just going to go back slightly because we
Yeah.
just did a good point to go on to that. But we were talking about the sort of personality traits that are good for crime scene investigation. Because the evidence you gather actually gets sent off to people in labs, is
Mm.
it possible to become a crime scene investigator without qualifications in forensic science, or is that a necessity for the role?
No, so that anyone can be a crime scene investigator. Most forces want you to have life skills, oh, if they're honest, because you don't, for us, there's so little, in some forces, the retention is so high because people don't understand what truly the nature of CSI is. So when they get into that role and they do stuff, they panic and then they go, I can't do this, it's too traumatic and leave. And that's the issue. It's not a hobby job, it's a career if people really want to do this. Um, so I think, yeah, I think that's probably the main point that I sort of make in regards to that.
So we're obviously speaking there about the fact that you don't need qualifications. And I'd said at the start that you do have a master's in forensic science. So this is actually my point to now go back into your past. What got you interested in STEM and going down that forensic science route?
Um, that's really interesting. And when everyone asks me, I genuinely don't have an answer. I fell into this completely. I've always been interested in crime and murder and all that lot. And I used to teach in the prison service and stuff years ago. And I fell pregnant and ended up having a baby. And he was where I am today. If I didn't have him, I don't think I would be where I am today. So because of him, I ended up going to university and doing criminology I actually ended up doing psychology with criminology as my first degree. Hated psychology and ended up swapping this for the second year and ended up in the third year as just being criminology with criminal justice and policing. And along those lines, I met my really good tutor and sort of found a little passion for research a little bit, and then ended up getting a job whilst I was there at the sexual assault referral centres. So I dealt with the victims of sexual assaults and really found that for me, and I worked for victim support at the same time, I really had the passion for victims and that side of things. Ended up doing a master's and then found that I absolutely adore blood spatter. I absolutely love entomology and flies, and I really, really love fire in just from a sort of a research side of things, and ended up doing a master's in forensic science and doing all those little elements and falling in love with all of those elements. And I ended up talking to my old tutor, and I actually did a research project that helped and supported Devon and Cornwall Police looking at Best Bar. We're helping with Best Bar None around Ask Angela campaign and stuff down here in the Plymouth. And from that kind of then really fell into actually, I would like to do forensics. I don't know how. It's down here in the southwest of the UK. It's really difficult to get into. It's like dead man's shoes down here. And that was the issue because I had a son and I didn't want to move anywhere. And I don't know. I ended up just getting into the police. That was my main thought: get into police and see where I go from there. And I did. I ended up getting into police, and then a job came up, and I ended up in forensics and has been in forensics for the last 7 years, just doing lots of different things, understanding the whole process of it. I'm quite a holistic person. If I want, I need to know the start and the end of the process and how it all works and pieces together and how and all of that. Um, and I love technology. I've always been, my whole family are computer geeks. It's always been in my life. Yeah, have ended up sort of now doing a PhD on it, on research on, technologies within forensics. But yeah, I kind of fell into it, if I'm completely honest. I had no background. If you spoke to me 10 years ago, I had no background in forensics. I had no, I had my master's, but it's just a master's. Don't get me wrong, it's hard work and it's a privilege to get it. But yeah, I fell into it and I couldn't have fallen into it in everything aligned for me quite well. And I always knew I was a practical person. I couldn't sit and do administration at a desk all day and have someone barking orders at me all day. So yeah, I kind of fell into it.
That's really interesting because a lot of people that I've spoken to can actually pinpoint a point in their past. But
Mm,
I'm actually very much like you that like, my science qualifications stop at fourth year of high school in Scotland. That I've got no science background and I just by complete chance fell into what I'm doing. So, and it's something I say to my students as well. And I'd said it at a STEM event recently that as children, you don't need to have your life figured out.
no.
But I think that's really refreshing hearing that from you, that you've just kind of followed different breadcrumbs as they've gone and found your interests as you've gone along. And I think that's a really important thing for people to be aware of. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed where I've got. I did my GCSEs, but I started A levels and got bored and ended up doing something completely different. And yeah, and that's what I'd like to remind my students is that the degrees they're doing is really relevant, and if they want to carry on with it, then we're always there to support them. But the students that we've spoken to recently through my colleague of youth worker and just talking to them, it's just making them aware that actually, like you just rightly said, don't panic, don't worry, it's okay. You will fall into where you're supposed to be. You don't have to have your life sorted at 16, 17. It will. My life completely changed and I'm where I am today because of my son. So yeah, I definitely didn't have my life planned. I wanted to be a vet. I was nowhere near clever enough for that. So